Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched Zack Snyder's Justice League. Let's talk about it. So the time has finally come to talk about Zack Snyder's Justice League, one of the most highly anticipated films of the year by far. Now, before we delve into my thoughts on the film itself, I did want to go through the series of events that led up to this moment, because it was a quite, complex and difficult situation that very much relied on the hard and sometimes harsh campaigning of Zack Snyder's fans in order to make this miracle happen. So I did want to go through the series of events that led up to today. And in order to do so, of course, we have to start with the 2017 version of this very same story that ended up being directed by Joss Whedon after Zack Snyder, who was initially supposed to be the director of this film, ended up having to leave due to some incredibly tragic circumstances. Now, with the exit of Zack Snyder, as well as Deborah Snyder, who acts as a producer on his films, as I said, we saw the entry of Joss Whedon, who of course is known for being a Marvel director, having directed the first and second Avengers films with a ton of success. So of course it would make sense that Warner Brothers would get him on board in order to tackle a very similar project just for a competing franchise. However, on top of this huge change, there were also a ton of studio notes that the studio had for Zack Snyder's version of the film. One of the more prominent notes that we see in the 2017 iteration of the film, especially compared to Zack Snyder's version, is the lack of humor, okay? The studio wanted to inject a lot more humor and a lot more Marvel-isms that made the MCU feel family friendly and a little bit more universal. They wanted to inject that into the Justice League, and Zack Snyder was very much pushing back against that. But with his departure, they were able to mold the Justice League in a way that they wanted to, in a way that they felt would appeal to a four-quadrant audience. And unfortunately, as a result of this, as well as a ton of other factors that we don't have time to get into in this video, the film ended up being just a huge mess. It was just, there were so many issues with the original Justice League, and it really did disappoint so many DC fans, to the point where after Zack Snyder revealed that there was a Snyder cut of the film that he had been working on prior to exiting the project, fans started to demand that Warner Brothers release the Snyder cut in order to see Zack's vision of the original film. So that is the backstory of the long journey to the Snyder cut. But with all of that being said, today we're going to be talking about whether or not I think that this film was worth it, and whether or not I think that it actually lived up to the hype, keeping in mind that the hype was real, especially for the true DC and Snyder fans. But before we delve into my thoughts on the Snyder cut, as per usual, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. Without further ado, let's dive right into this. Okay, so first off, we need to discuss the elephant in the room, and that is the runtime of this film. Because for those of you who don't know, this film is 4 hours long. This film is literally 4 hours long. Like, this film is literally a sixth of a whole day. Now, some of you guys might be thinking, well, Jean, listen, Endgame. Okay, Endgame was 3 and a bit hours long too, so like, why are you complaining? The difference with Endgame is that it was the culmination of 10 years of storytelling. But the DCEU doesn't have that. So in reality, this ridiculous runtime is really to just make up for the deficits in storytelling that preceded the Justice League 2017 version. If you think back to the stage at which the DCEU was at before the Justice League came out, I mean, we had Wonder Woman, but that was pretty much the only solo film apart from Man of Steel back in 2013. And of course, we had Batman vs Superman in 2016, but that was a shared film between the two characters, meaning that Batman had not been able to get his own solo film to introduce the character and to really flesh him out as per the usual Marvel model. The reason why we end up with this hugely inflated runtime is because we had to make up for a lot of the deficits that preceded the 2017 release, where these characters were not properly introduced and were not properly developed at that point, and as a result we weren't really able to get invested in those characters. So the film had to make up for a lot of that and do a lot of that work right here, like right now. Whilst I completely understand the reasoning behind this runtime, and also the fact that Zack Snyder, you know, he was given full creative control for this project this time around, a vast difference to his experience with the 2017 theatrical cut. So he did the thing, okay? Like, he went wild, he went crazy, okay? Warner Brothers gave him some toys and he played, and you can see the joy, you can see the passion in this project. There's no doubt about that. He very much took advantage of this very unique opportunity and he did his all. Okay, this is so Zack Snyder. This project is oozing Zack Snyder, but as a result, it does sometimes feel quite overindulgent, okay? I'm so sorry. The film sometimes feels quite overindulgent, and even though I understand the reasoning behind the runtime and the idea that Zack Snyder really wanted to pace himself, which is again a large contrast to his experience previously, where everything was so rushed because Warner Brothers wanted to catch up to the MCU, but here you can see that he's just taking his time. He really allows these scenes to linger and marinate in the film. Like, you can tell that he has no rush and he's really allowing us to soak in the atmosphere and soak in the storytelling. But as I said, a lot of times that does feel a little bit overindulgent, especially in combination with the other Snyderisms that come with it, which we'll talk about in a second. So yeah, the runtime is felt, okay? Now, if we're just sticking to some of the technical aspects of this film as well, one thing that I also have to mention right up top is the aspect ratio, okay? So I watched this film on my flat screen TV, and I have to say that the aspect ratio annoyed the hell out of me. I actually tried to Google whether or not it was possible to watch the film at a different aspect ratio, but I saw this message from HBO Max like, we're not going to change the aspect ratio because we respect cinema. And it's like, it's not a question of not respecting cinema. We literally can't go to the cinemas right now. Like, we are currently still in lockdown here in the UK, and we don't even know when cinemas are going to be opening. So the idea of like, we respect cinema, so that's why we're going to force you to watch this in a 4:3 aspect ratio that's only suitable for IMAX theaters makes no goddamn sense. Like, it means you're punishing me for watching this at home when I literally can't watch it elsewhere. It was really annoying to me. It was really annoying. I felt like I was only seeing a part of the picture. I feel like it would be so much more beneficial to have that aspect ratio be wider so we can get that sense of scope and scale that really matches the epic feel of the overall film. But whatever, we had to deal with this 4:3 situation. It wasn't the end of the world, and by the time that you're on like the second hour, you start to forget. You start to forget. That's the least of your problems, honestly. And finally, since we're sticking to the technical aspects of the film, I have to say another criticism that I had for this one, and this is a criticism that I've had for many DCEU films overall, is the Snyderverse cinematography. Listen, I've already said this multiple times on my channel, but I am not a fan of the aesthetic of the Snyderverse. I am just not. I like color, okay? You probably can't tell today, but that's because I'm dressed appropriately for the film. But usually I like color. Oh, I appreciate all of the colors of the spectrum. I like me a good rainbow. I mean, just look at my channel page. Actually, that will tell you what kind of color-minded person I am. I really do enjoy bright, vibrant, vivid colors. And so imagine my dismay. Imagine my displeasure, honestly, imagine my disappointment at seeing just 4 hours of desaturated, near black and white, okay? These colors have just been sucked the life out of them, and the whole atmosphere is just cloudy constantly. There's a scene that takes place in London that, like, okay, we know that London can be quite cloudy. We know that it rains a lot in the UK, but I've never seen clouds like that. No. I will challenge you to show me a place that looks quite as miserable as London did in this film. I mean, it's just a lot. And there's pathetic fallacy, and then there's whatever this is, because honestly, pathetic fallacy works best when you have a contrast between the bright and sunny and the dull and cloudy. But here there's no contrast. It's just constant dullness and cloudiness and grayness and desaturation. But then get this, the only insertions of color that you actually do get are the red or orange light beams that are constantly appearing, and at one point it becomes just so overwhelming and you just feel so overly stimulated by those beams of red and orange and sometimes blue light because of the flash, that honestly I had to take a break. Like, I had to pause the film. I was getting a bit of a headache, so I wasn't the biggest fan of the cinematography of this film in the slightest, which is interesting because I've often said that I think that Zack Snyder is a better cinematographer than he is a director, simply because he focuses so heavily on visuals. I mean, we see that here more than ever before. As I said, we do have a bit of an overindulgence in Snyderisms with the slow-mo. And again, slow-mo works best when you have a contrast, where you have the contrast between the normal time versus the slowed down version. When it's just constantly in slow-mo, it's no longer as effective. You just become desensitized towards it. So I really don't understand the overuse of slow-mo. But anyway, I do think that while some of the imagery that he creates is clearly intentionally artistic and intentionally just grand and epic in scale, I do still think that the overall look of the film is just way too grey blue, way too miserable. It sucks the life out of everything, and I feel like it really does a disservice to the different environments as well, because in this film you're traveling across all of these different worlds. You get to see Themyscira, except this time around, instead of the lush greens and the vibrant golds of Themyscira that we saw in Patty Jenkins's iteration of this place, in Zack Snyder's version, like it's just so dull. And then you have Aquaman visiting Atlantis, and it's the same thing there. The vibrant blues of Atlantis that we saw in James Wan's version of this place is just sucked dry of life and of vibrancy. I really am not a fan. And secondly, I would also say that I wasn't the biggest fan of the use of the CG in this film as well. That's kind of paired with the cinematography in terms of the visuals that we have overall. Some of the CG is actually very, very good. For example, in the case of Steppenwolf's armor, I think that was one of the pictures that people got very, very excited about. And I feel like the armor really does do a lot in order to reflect light and in order to allow him to stand out, especially, as I said, as the backgrounds are often so grey black that if he wasn't wearing something ultra shiny, he wouldn't really stand out and you wouldn't really be able to follow his movements and what he's up to. So I do think that the armor change was a very, very good idea. It also helped to make him more menacing, and I like the way that they moved, like the plates were moving as he moved and as his mood shifted. It was very creative in that way. But I didn't like Steppenwolf himself. Steppenwolf himself is so ugly. We can talk about the villains like up top right now. Steppenwolf is so ugly. I really dislike the character designs for the villains in this film, including Steppenwolf and Darkseid, who we'll talk about in a second. I think his actual face was so ugly. It reminded me of the Black Order, I believe, Thanos' Black Order from Avengers Infinity War. I said the same thing about those characters too. I think they look like video game characters. They don't look real. They don't have any palpable texture. As I mentioned, his armor does, which is quite impressive, but he himself looks like a video game character because you don't have the texture that has been put into the character to make him feel real, to make the texture of his skin feel palpable. And that's something that Marvel worked really hard on when it came to the character of Thanos specifically, because oftentimes when you look at the character of Thanos up close, you can see the texture of his skin and the wrinkles of his chin. The wrinkles of his chin, like they really worked hard to bring that to life, to make him feel like a palpable character, as opposed to a video game character that has just been inserted in, like just pasted in to a world that he's completely disconnected from. But still, as much as I hated looking at Steppenwolf's face, he was infinitely better, infinitely more enjoyable to look at than Darkseid. You want to talk about a video game character? You can't convince me that Darkseid exists. You can't. Darkseid is a figment of our imagination. I'm so sorry. I don't want to be mean or cruel, but the character design of Darkseid just ain't it. Oh, it's really not. There's no detailing. There's no texture. You want to talk about a lack of texture? The character looks like he's just one texture, from his armor to his like clothing to his skin. Apart from the metals that he has on, that's literally it. It's either this rubbery material that you see again in video games, or just shiny metal. Like that's literally all that Darkseid is. And even his facial features aren't very well defined. Like you can can see that the mocap work, if there even was any, was not done as well as, say, in a character like Thanos. Like, it's just night and day. And consequently, unfortunately, as a result of that, I do feel like I didn't find Darkseid to be a threatening character in the slightest, because I didn't feel like he was real. Like, I didn't feel like he actually existed in that world. When the Justice League were looking at him through this portal, it felt as though they were looking at a screen. It felt like as though they were looking at a film themselves, because it didn't really feel like he existed in the world. It certainly didn't help that the character himself was quite poorly written. I will say, to this film's defense, it does a much better job of creating the lore surrounding Darkseid. It really does try to give us a sense of his importance, a sense of the fear that people have for him, by creating this kind of mythology around the character that Wonder Woman finds out during her little Indiana Jones moment that she has. That was very reminiscent to me of the moment in Thor Ragnarok where Hela reveals the true mural that existed underneath the fake one that Odin had commissioned after, you know, colonizing the 9 realms, okay? After he was trying to spread lies about how he actually ended up being the All-Father, okay? Like, that was very reminiscent of that moment to me. So I liked that, because I like the incorporation of Greco-Roman mythology in the DCEU. I think that's something that they should do so much more. So I really enjoyed seeing that. I really enjoyed seeing the battle in Themyscira with Darkseid, and seeing him actually get wounded almost fatally, and seeing how that would have festered in him this sense of hatred and this sense of resentment towards mankind. I like that exploration as well as seeing some Greek gods, actual Greek gods, fighting in that battle. Like, all of that was really cool, except the whole mother box thing, the whole anti-life equation. I'm not a DC person. I don't read comics just in general, but I certainly don't keep up with DC lore or DC, you know, background information. I'm not doing homework going into this film, is my point. So the anti-life equation, what? Like, what is it? Please explain. Please explain what the anti-life equation is. How is it different to just, and like, how is it just different? How is it different to just killing someone? Because it seems as though he's been doing a good job of that anyways. Apparently he's been turning planets into dust like someone else that we know. So why does he need an anti-life equation? I don't understand. Although I have that same comment about Thanos, to be fair. Like, I didn't quite understand why he needed the Infinity Stones to begin with, because it seems as though these guys are doing a good enough job destroying the universe on their own. Okay, so now let's get into the Justice League themselves, and I'm going to be talking about them in order of my favorite to least favorite member of the team. First off, right off the bat, we have Cyborg. Now, this is the definition of bittersweet. The definition of bittersweet, because I have a bone to pick with Warner Brothers. I have a bone to pick with Walter Hamada. How did they let this character and this actor slip through their grimy little fingers? Really? I can't believe that so much of Cyborg's role in the original Justice League film was omitted just entirely, as if not having that element of the film there would make any goddamn sense. Because, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen the original 2017 version, it doesn't make any sense for there to be so much of an omission of this character. This character is at the center of the story, and that is made so clear in this version. Why did they get rid of so many of his scenes? Why did they get rid of so much of his story? Because it's just night and day. It's literally night and day. Cyborg goes from being one of the most underdeveloped characters in Justice League, which is saying something because it's a story about underdeveloped characters, to one of the most developed characters with so much heart, with so much pathos, with so much complexity to his story. His relationship with his father is such a huge aspect of this story, and it plays into the relationships that the other team members have with their parents, okay? Like, there isn't a single living parent in sight. There isn't a single living parent in sight. I think Aquaman still has his father at this point, and he doesn't know that his mother is still alive. Spoiler alert for Aquaman the movie. But yeah, there's a very complex Disney-like parent and child relationships just sprinkled throughout the Justice League. And here we have Cyborg just being at the core of this. I mean, this character is so well written in this film. It's night and day, as I said, in comparison to the 2017 iteration of this story. And I have to say that Ray Fisher just knocked this out of the park. He knocked the performance out of the park, and it brings me so much sadness to hear that he probably won't be in any other DCEU films or entries because of the controversy surrounding racism accusations. okay, at Warner Brothers during the filming of the original Justice League, okay, as well as some other conduct allegations and just a ton of mess surrounding Walter Hamada and surrounding Jeff Johns and Joss Whedon. Oh my goodness, like it's so unfortunate. It's really unfortunate, and I just feel bad for Ray Fisher because he gave this performance his all. Clearly he wanted to redeem the character of Cyborg, and he did such a great job of doing so. So he's my number one here for sure when it comes to the members of the Justice League. And secondly, we have my girl Wonder Woman. Yep, my girl Wonder, absolutely. Absolutely, I'm team Wonder Woman all the way because she always gets the job done. Okay, now what's really interesting to note about this version of Wonder Woman is that she is more akin to the version of the character that we saw in Batman vs Superman, where she was first introduced into the Snyderverse. I personally prefer Wonder Woman in her own solo films under the direction of Patty Jenkins, but I will say that it was a little bit more of a disconnect than I expected to see this far more serious, you know, dark and gritty Wonder Woman. We'll talk about dark and gritty in a second. In comparison to the version of the character that we saw in the sequel to her film just this last December, the tones are incredibly different between the two films to begin with, but the character herself is also quite different. She is an Amazon warrior, okay, and you can see that. The film is quite violent overall, and she very much participates in that. She doesn't withhold her powers or her strength in any way, whether she's dealing with these massive aliens or just regular old human terrorists, okay? Also, side note, I did like the little scene that they had at the beginning there. It was an extension of the scene that was featured in the original film, where Wonder Woman saves these kids that are in this girls' school wearing their little kilts. That was very, that was a flashback to my own life, okay? Wearing a kilt to go to secondary school. I did enjoy that moment that she had, that interaction with the girls. I feel like it was quite heavy-handed in its like girl power messaging, but sometimes you need that, honestly. But yeah, I did enjoy Wonder Woman's scenes quite a bit. The biggest criticism that I would have is that she's, first of all, still crying over Steve Trevor. She's still, I kind of hate the fact that the women in this film, the main women being, you know, Wonder Woman herself, Diana Prince, and Lois Lane, they tend to spend a lot of time being sad about their former love interests in the Snyderverse. One character far more so than the other. I'm talking about Lois Lane, of course, who literally just exists to be an extension of Superman and not be a character in her own right at this point. But anyways, I don't love that, okay? Like, I don't love that. I don't love that Wonder Woman is still obsessed with Steve Trevor, even after the events of Wonder Woman 1984, which, to be fair, Zack Snyder couldn't have foreseen. And secondly, another thing that did kind of annoy me about her scenes was the CG surrounding her action sequences. Yeah, it wasn't convincing. Again, the key thing about CG is that sometimes it can make things look like a video game, and when it starts looking like a video game, it no longer feels palpable, it no longer feels real and plausible, and as a result you just kind of check out because you're like, oh, I'm just watching a cutscene from a game, from like God of War, as opposed to something that could actually happen, that could affect my world and build tension within me. Alright, so next up we have the rest of the gang, and I have to say there's quite a bit of a leap between Wonder Woman and the rest, because I wasn't the biggest fan of the rest, okay? First we have Batman, who he, you know, unites the team. That's pretty much his big role here, is that he recruits the members of the Justice League based off of the information that he got in Batman vs Superman from Lex Luthor's archives, which I didn't love the reminders of Batman vs Superman, but it makes sense within the canon of the Snyderverse, so fine. I did kind of cringe a bit from PTSD when I saw references to that film, but you know, fine, it makes sense. Batman did manage to unite the team together in order to fight against this cause, okay, in order to fight against Armageddon by the hands of Darkseid. But other than that, like, he had some cute interactions with Diana, I guess. And with some of the other members of the team, but I've never been the biggest fan of Batfleck. Like, I'm so sorry, I've never been the biggest fan of Batfleck. I'm not the biggest fan of Batman to begin with, so you know, there's that. But Batfleck to me is just so dour. His portrayal of the character is very low-key and reserved and restrained, and it doesn't make for the most charismatic leader to a team. I don't want to compare him to Tony Stark because they're just two different entities, but even if you have a character like Black Panther, for example, as portrayed by Chadwick Boseman, who wasn't the flashiest, kind of loudest voice in the room like Tony Stark is, but he still had that sense of authority reality and regality to him that made him a very captivating character nonetheless. I wish Batman had more of that going on. I really hope that Robert Pattinson's iteration of the character will give us something else, because I'm not the biggest fan of the way that Ben Affleck played this character. I also think that his suit looks way too padded. He looks ridiculous. He looks chunkier than Superman himself. That makes no sense. How can you be impressed by Superman's general chunkiness when you're looking at Batman, who looks like he's literally inflated? Like, next up we have Aquaman, and he's basically just there. I really did notice the difference between his portrayal in the original Justice League versus this one, because he again is very much more reserved, more serious, more dour and depressed, to kind of match the overall tone of the film. When it comes to Aquaman, like, a lot of his charisma and a lot of the jokes that he had in the original Justice League were kind of sucked out, okay? They were completely dumped. He ends up being a little bit of an agitating character. He tries to look at things from different perspectives and challenges the idea that Cyborg would automatically be on their team just because that Wonder Woman and Batman had researched him. Like, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. He's much more suspicious of him. Other than that, he sometimes comes across as someone who's dragging his feet a little bit, which isn't fun to watch, especially when you see the team start to build their team dynamics a little bit more. And of course, we also have the Flash, who's portrayed by Ezra Miller, and I just don't like this character. I don't like this character. Remember when I was talking about, you know, inserting some humor here or there to make things a little bit more lighthearted? He's supposed to be the sort of comedic relief in this film, but I just didn't find any of his jokes to land, didn't find him to be funny, and there was just such a tonal shift that honestly, for me, the problem isn't the comedic relief. The problem is the rest. Like, the rest of it being so dour and dark and gritty that it's just not... It's not enjoyable for me personally, okay? It's just not my thing at the end of the day. I mean, I sat through this for 4 hours. I can hold my hands up and say that I tried, but having the Flash there is not enough for me to find this, you know, enjoyable and engaging. Also, I have to say, I'm not the biggest fan of the way that he runs. I think the running is still ridiculous. I know that they made some modifications with the running style, but why not just call up, like, Usain Bolt? Warner Brothers can afford to. Like, someone call up Usain Bolt and ask him how does he look so cool while he's running, like in real life, just running, and then get Ezra Miller to try and mimic that. Maybe get them at like a training session together. Warner Brothers could make that happen. Honestly, just call up Usain Bolt, the fastest man alive, and get them to run together. Because Ezra Miller's situation is not, it's not it. I know what they're trying to go for, like this artistic kind of run, but it just looks ridiculous. And again, the overuse of slow motion doesn't even have that same impact that it's supposed to, because his whole thing is slow motion, so there's no real contrast there. And finally, we have Superman himself, the one that they tried to revive near the end of the film, and you know, his appearance is quite similar to the one that we saw in 2017, except of course with no like that's gone, okay? Like, that was the first thing to go, I'm sure. But Henry Cavill is, you know, pretty good in this role. He's not given as much as I thought he would be, because he kind of comes in at the end there where the team is a little bit more established. He shakes things up a little bit by fighting the team at first when he's first revived, but then of course Lois comes in and reassures him that everything is okay. He visits his farm, he sees his mother. Oh yeah, that's another one with an actual parent in their lives. He sees his mother. Yeah, he mostly just chills until he needs to get the job done, innit? Like, and until he needs to clock in for work, okay? And at that point, things are flying. At that point, Steppenwolf flying in the air, crashing down, terrified, quaking. At that point, the game is done, because Superman has arrived, and we already know that Darkseid is afraid of two things: Green Lanterns, who we saw him defeat pretty easily during that flashback sequence, and Kryptonians, who of course we've just revived through Superman, and yeah, it's game over. It's game over for everyone else. Go home. And finally, I also did want to touch on something that I've been talking about throughout this review, and that is the tone of this film, because as I mentioned before, one of the kind of notes that the studio gave Zack Snyder when he was working on the 2017 version of this project is that it needed a little bit more humor, likely to mirror the tone of the MCU, which is interesting because one of the things that the DCEU set out to do was be a counter to the tone of the MCU. As I mentioned in my upcoming video, talking about the background of the DCEU and the troubles that it has faced. So yeah, it's very interesting to see how the backlash of Batman vs Superman and the Suicide Squad led to a lot of tonal shifts and a lot of, you know, goal changes when it came to the DCEU. But that's clearly not something that Zack Snyder wanted to do for his vision of this story, and we can see that throughout this film. It's very serious, it's very, you know, dark and gritty, and this is very much a kind of legacy that Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy left behind, especially for the DCEU. However, that's also one of the things that I happen to dislike about the Snyderverse as well, because it seems to me that Snyder thinks that, you know, if you have something that's dark and gritty, it automatically translates to complex and layered and mature and sophisticated, and that really isn't the case. It really isn't the case. Unfortunately, for that to happen, you need to have good storytelling, you need to have excellent writing, great character development, great character depictions, and also a world that people are actually invested in, so that when things are happening to them, this tension and the stakes feel very high. Without that, no matter how desaturated the visuals are, you're not going to get that same emotional impact, because the character work and the groundwork simply has not been done. And to Zack Snyder's credit, I think he very much realized that, which is why the film is so long, because it makes an effort to rectify a lot of the problems that the original Justice League had in terms of character development. But still, you simply can't do that, especially when you have, you know, 6 characters in a film, and I think it's like 4 out of the 6 have not been fully developed outside of the film, and in fact were introduced in this film. I think it's very difficult to try and catch up to all of that lost time when it comes to character development and adding complexity to this story. Keep in mind that there have been films within the DCEU itself, including Joker, or if you want to go outside of the DCEU, you have Logan, where you have that added sense of sophistication and complexity and depth in these characters and in these stories, but at the same time you haven't sacrificed a good color grading. So with all of that being said, I'm going to be giving Zack Snyder's Justice League a 6.5 out of 10. So that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on Zack Snyder's Justice League, I know that I wasn't as complimentary as others may be, but this is just my opinion on the Snyderverse. Like I've already said, I'm not the biggest fan of the Snyderverse, but I will say unequivocally, without a doubt, this film was a huge improvement to the original 2017 version by far. But now it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this film down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.